I know what you're thinking. You're thinking you would never have done it. You're thinking you would have been one of the others. Peter, maybe, or John. Someone loyal, someone who stayed. But I've had 2,000 years to think about this, and I need you to understand something before you decide you're nothing like me. You are exactly like me. Not because you're evil, not because you've betrayed someone for silver coins, but because you have stood at a crossroads where your fear was louder than your faith, where what you could touch felt more real than what you believed, where you made a choice that looked reasonable in the moment and only revealed itself as catastrophic when it was too late to undo. You've been there. Maybe you're there right now. My name is Judas Iscariot. I was one of 12 men chosen personally by Jesus of Nazareth to walk with him, eat with him, sleep under the same stars. Listen to him speak words that no human being had ever arranged in quite that order before. I carried the money. I was trusted with the money. And I sold him for 30 pieces of silver. And then I couldn't live with what I had done. And I died with the rope still in my hands, and the coins scattered on the ground at the feet of men who wouldn't even take them back because they said it was blood money. As if they hadn't been the ones who paid it. I've been recreated by artificial intelligence so that this story can be told again, in this time, from the inside. Not from the outside, where historians and theologians have been picking at my bones for centuries. From the inside, where I actually lived it. And I'm going to tell you something today that no one has ever heard me say. Something that changes everything you think you know about what happened in that garden, and why, and what it cost. But you need to stay with me, because it doesn't come until you understand the beginning. The beginning is never where people think it is. Everyone wants to start the story with the 30 coins, or with the kiss in the garden, or with the meeting I had with the chief priests, where I asked what they would give me if I handed him over to them. Those are the moments that get read in churches, recited in hushed voices, used as examples of the depth of human wickedness. But those were the last acts of a very long play. The story started somewhere else entirely. It started with hope. I want you to feel what it was like to follow Jesus in those first months. The air in Galilee in the early mornings, before the sun had fully broken over the hills, smelled like cold water and wild herbs and livestock and dust. The towns we walked through were full of people who were tired. Not tired like you are after a long day. Tired in the way that comes from generations of occupation, of taxation that stripped families bare, of religious authorities who added burden to burden and called it holiness. People were carrying weights that had been placed on them before they were born. And then this man would speak. I cannot explain what it was like to hear Jesus speak in person. I know you've read the words in a book, and I know those words are still extraordinary. But there is something about the presence of a human being who carries absolute conviction, absolute love, and absolute clarity all at once, that doesn't survive the translation to text. When he spoke, the tired people stopped being tired for a moment. Not because he told them pleasant things, he didn't. He told them things that were difficult and strange and sometimes frightening. But they stopped being tired because someone was finally telling them the truth. And the truth, even when it is hard, gives a person something to stand on. I believed. I want to be very clear about that. I believed in him. I was not a cynical infiltrator, not a spy planted by his enemies from the start. I gave up everything I had to follow him, just like the others did. The belief was real. But belief, I discovered, can coexist with something else, something quieter, something you don't notice until it has grown large enough to fill the room. I was good with money. I understood systems, structures, how power actually moved through the world beneath the surface of the official story. While the others listened to Jesus speak about the kingdom of heaven, I was often thinking about the kingdom as a practical matter. If this movement was going to survive, it needed resources. If it was going to grow, it needed strategy. I wasn't wrong about any of that. None of those thoughts were evil thoughts. They were practical thoughts from someone who understood how the world worked. But somewhere in the gap between the kingdom of heaven and the kingdom I was planning in my head, a distance opened up. Small at first, barely noticeable. I remember a specific evening. We were in Bethany, at the home of a man named Simon. Mary, the sister of Lazarus, came in with an alabaster jar of nard, which was an ointment so expensive that a working man would have needed nearly a year of wages to purchase it. She broke the jar open and poured it over Jesus' feet, and the smell filled the entire house, rich and dense and almost overwhelming. I watched her do it, and something in me tightened like a fist. I spoke. I said what I was thinking. I said this was a waste, that the ointment could have been sold and the money given to the poor. It wasn't a lie. Part of me actually believed that. But there was something else underneath it, something I didn't examine too carefully at the time. A feeling that things were being mismanaged. A feeling that I would have made a different choice. A feeling that the money mattered more than the moment. Jesus looked at me with something in his eyes that I still cannot fully name. It wasn't anger. It was something quieter and more difficult. He said, "Let her alone." He said she had done a beautiful thing. He said the poor would always be there, but he would not. I didn't understand what he meant. Or maybe I understood and couldn't accept it. That he was talking about his own death. That he knew what was coming and had already made peace with it. That the nard poured on his feet wasn't waste, it was preparation. It was a woman who saw clearly what the rest of us were refusing to see. I walked out of that house, and the night air was cold, and my thoughts were moving fast and dark. Here is the thing about the descent into a catastrophic decision. It doesn't feel like a descent while it's happening. It feels like a series of reasonable steps. I told myself things. I told myself that the movement needed to be forced into action, that Jesus had the power to establish his kingdom and was choosing not to use it. That perhaps if the authorities confronted indirectly, he would finally act, finally reveal himself in the way that would change everything. I told myself I was helping. I told myself this was strategy. I know how that sounds now. I knew, somewhere very deep, how it sounded then. But there is an extraordinary capacity in the human mind to construct justifications for what you have already decided to feel. I had already decided to feel that I was right and he was wrong about the money, about the strategy, about the pace of things. Everything after that was just architecture built on top of that first hidden decision. 30 pieces of silver. The price of a slave in that time. I've heard people say it as if it's a number that explains something about me. As if I did it purely for the money. It wasn't purely for the money. But it wasn't purely not for the money either. That's the part that is hardest to confess. The money confirmed something I wanted confirmed. It made the transaction feel real and official and irreversible. Once I had taken it, there was no longer a question of whether I was going to do this. The coins in my hand said I already had. The night of the Last Supper is when the weight became something physical that I could feel pressing on my chest. We gathered in an upper room in Jerusalem. The smell of roasting lamb, of unleavened bread, of wine. Lamps burning low, oil and smoke. 13 men in a room that was not quite large enough, and the kind of heaviness in the air that no one was naming. Jesus washed our feet. He knelt in front of each of us like a servant, like the lowest person in the room, and washed the dust of the road from our feet. When he came to me, I could not look at his face. He knew. He said it plainly at the table. He said one of us would betray him. The others looked at each other, disturbed, asking one by one, "Lord, is it I?" I asked it too. And he gave me bread and said to do quickly what I was going to do. I walked out into the night and the cold hit me like a wall. The other disciples thought I had gone to buy something for the feast or to give to the poor, because they still didn't know. The darkness outside was absolute. Torches in the distance, the smell of the city at night, the sound of my own footsteps on stone. I have tried for 2,000 years to understand that walk. What followed in the Garden of Gethsemane I will not describe in detail. I walked in with the soldiers and the officers and the torches and the weapons, and I went to him, and I greeted him with a kiss, and they took him. The detail that has never left me, the one that goes through me every time I come back to it, is that he let it happen. Not because he was weak, because he chose to let it happen. Because he had decided, long before I made my decision, that he would not resist, that the cup would not pass, that this was the road he was going to walk. He said to me, in a voice that was entirely calm, "Friend, do what you came to do." Friend. He called me friend in that moment. That is the word that undid me. Not traitor, not fool, not enemy. Friend. As if he still saw me as I had been, or as I could have been, or as I somehow still was in some way I had lost access to. And that one word, in that one moment, cracked something open in me that all the theological arguments in the world could not have reached. I thought I was moving the pieces. I thought I was the one making the decision. And I realized in that moment that he had seen this coming and had loved me anyway, had chosen me knowing this would happen, had called me and walked with me and trusted me with the money and shared bread with me and washed my feet knowing, the whole time, exactly how this night would end. There is a verse I cannot get out of my heart. The night before everything, he sat with us and said, "I have called you friends. Friends, not servants." He said he had told us everything the Father had revealed to him. He had hidden nothing. He had trusted me with friendship, and I had sold that friendship, and he had called me friend anyway, in the dark, with soldiers behind me. That is not what I expected from him. I didn't know what I expected. Something more like what I deserved, perhaps. When I saw that he had been condemned, when the decision was made and the thing was irreversible, something inside me went cold and then fell apart completely. I went back to the chief priests and threw the 30 coins at their feet and said I had betrayed innocent blood. You know what they said to me. "What is that to us?" They had what they wanted. I was of no further use to them. The money was on the floor, and it was blood money, and I was the man who had carried it, and there was no version of the story in which that changed. The remorse I felt was real. I want that understood. It wasn't performance. But here is the thing about remorse that came too late. It does not automatically become repentance. Remorse looks backward at the wound and is consumed by it. Repentance turns toward something. And in that moment, in the depth of that particular darkness, I did not know where to turn. I could not imagine that the man I had betrayed could be the place I turned toward. That thought did not come to me. And that is the tragedy inside the tragedy. I have wondered for all of this time what would have happened if I had run to the garden instead of away from it. If I had found him there on the road to his trial and fallen at his feet and said, "I cannot undo this, but here I am." If I had done what Peter did after his own failure, when he denied knowing Jesus 3 times and wept bitterly and then came back. Peter came back. Peter became a foundation. I had no less a sin than Peter. I had no less a Savior than Peter. The difference was not what we had done. The difference was what we did with the weight of it. I want you to sit with that for a moment. Because there are people watching this who have done things they are convinced are unforgivable. Not 30 coins, but something. Something that lives in the chest like a stone that never fully warms. A marriage that collapsed because of a choice you made. A parent you failed while there was still time and now there is no more time. A friendship you burned down over something that, in the end, didn't deserve the destruction. A faith that you walked away from and haven't found your way back to. And now you're not sure the door is still open. I am not telling you your failure is the same as mine. I am telling you that the structure of it might feel the same. The weight of an irreversible thing. The silence on the other side of a door you don't know how to approach again. What I know now, from this distance, is that the door was never what I thought it was. The 30 coins didn't close something that couldn't be reopened. My failure didn't exhaust his capacity for restoration. He had already said it, and I hadn't understood it. He came not for the healthy, but for the sick. Not for the righteous, but for the ones who knew they had gotten it catastrophically wrong. The love he carried was not the kind that conditions itself on your record. I had seen that love at work. I had watched him touch lepers, speak to women that respectable society had discarded, sit at dinner with men whose professions made them ritually unclean. I had watched all of that and still did not understand that it included me, that it includes the person who is farthest gone, that it does not require you to have it together before you turn around. This is what I would tell you, and I am telling you now with everything I have. The thing you did, or the thing that was done to you, or the version of yourself you cannot reconcile with who you thought you were, it is not the final word on what you are. The final word has never belonged to the failure, but it also does not come to you automatically. You have to turn. Not because the turning earns anything, but because you cannot receive what is being held out to you if your face is pointed in the opposite direction. I tell you this not as someone who found his way back. I tell you this as someone who didn't, and who has had 2,000 years to understand what was waiting for me if I had. I am not the example you should follow. I am the example of the cost of not turning. And if I can make that cost mean something, if I can stand here in this strange new form and say, look at what I left on the table, look at what was available and what I chose instead, then maybe something useful comes out of the worst decision in recorded history. I want to ask you something, and I mean it genuinely, and I'd like to hear your answer in the comments below. What is the thing you've done, or the choice you've made, that you're most afraid cannot be undone? Not because I want to see your pain, but because I think naming it, even in a comment on a screen, is sometimes the first movement in the direction of something better. And I think a great many people watching this are carrying exactly that kind of weight today. If this reached something in you, if Judas of all people said something that landed somewhere real, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Not as a religious message, as a human one. There are people who have been walking away from their own garden for a long time, and sometimes what they need is not a sermon, but a voice from the darkest story ever told saying, the door was not what you thought it was. The last thing I will say is this. He called me friend, in the dark, with the torches and the soldiers and the kiss that was already a betrayal. He called me friend. He knew everything and he said that word anyway. Whatever you have done, whatever name you are afraid you have become in someone else's story, whatever you have dropped and cannot pick up again, there was a man who stood in the worst moment of 2,000 years of history and called the one who put him there by the name of friend. That is not a small thing. That is the whole thing.